A very good evening and welcome to this edition of the Fourth Estate. 52 years of independent Uganda. Is it yet uhuru? President Yoweri Museveni used the occasion of the 52nd independence anniversary to lambast the International Criminal Court, especially on its indictment and trial of Kenya's leaders, the President Uhuru Kenyatta and Vice President William Ruto, and Arap Sang, the journalist. We'll be discussing that. Let me introduce in the studio tonight Timothy Nyakahuma Kaligira. Timothy, very nice to have you.
Thank you. Good evening.
You're editor for the Kampala Express, an online, a Facebook newspaper.
Yeah,
I think
still
Uganda's
online.
first. Yes,
Still online.
Uganda's first Facebook newspaper. Very nice to have
me.
you.
I specialize in pioneering. That was the Uganda record. First online on a newspaper, and then this now. So that's me.
You also pioneered. You wrote the Uganda Almanac, Africa Almanac.
Google material in a tropical African country. But anyway, please go on.
Very nice to have you. Let me jump to Chris Obore. Chris Obore is investigations editor at the Daily Monitor and part of the Fourth Estate. So I don't need to introduce you more. Do I?
Yeah. Thank you for introducing our Socrates of our times, Timothy Kalegira.
Chris is from the Fifth Estate.
Which is the
Okay,
Fifth
that
Estate?
The Fifth Estate is that part of the media that sort of, in a sense, like a watchdog on the Fourth Estate, which, as we know, in Uganda has, much to explain. But
We'll have a discussion on the Fourth Estate and the media. We have actually had a discussion here about the media and its conduct before. We've done two shows. I think we need to do another one, which we should arrange. And Nicholas Opio. Nicholas Opio is an advocate of the High Court of Uganda and a political analyst and commentator. Nicholas,
I'm actually an advocate of the courts of judication, not just
Courts
the
of
High Court.
Judication. Okay.
Yeah, but thank you very much, and good evening to all the viewers. I'm happy to be here with my childhood hero. I used to read, Timothy when I was growing up, and I think he's a great writer. I also think that Timothy was, in legal memory in this country, the first journalist to be tried for publishing a story online. I don't know if that trial is still going on.
very much going on, yes.
Yeah, but good to see you, Tim.
Tim, I actually want to start with
Before
you.
even start with him, I think we never give credit to some people. This man here is never given credit for who he is. So many things. People just take Timothy for granted. They want to Kusimo Genze. But he does so many things. If he was living in a daylight society, Timothy would be up there in the police organs. Unfortunately, he's just with us writing and taking photographs. And we think he's not.
I hope you're not suggesting that in the wrong place. Timothy, let me start with you. At 52 years of independence, you do a grand celebration at Kololo, and you're having all these ceremonial things. But then you step back and ask, are we really independent as a country? Is this a definition of independence 52 years later? Sometimes I use the example of a 52-year-old man. If Uganda was personified, should Uganda be celebrating that it is 52 years old?
Well, like everything else in history, there are milestones, however contradictory and hollow, that still matter. The 9th of October, we became independent, or what on Friday on KFM Charles Odonkthor described as more accurately self-rule than independent. Because there's no question we technically rule ourselves. How independent? Well, we very much know that's questionable, but it is something worth noting. Even its limitations we need to discuss. So, next question, are we truly independent? Of course we're not independent. For complicated reasons that have to do with the lack of development, that have to do with the global system that was created in 1944, a year before the World War ended, Second World War, the World Bank, IMF systems, the very backbone of the world structure, the International Telegraphic Union, simple things like your country code 256 selected in Switzerland, in Bern, basic things in the 1990s when the internet develops, such things as the allotment of our country domain name .co.ug, all these complicated technical structures and wirings that create the global system. We always just the actors, we get the handed down. So, because of that, we are under 3/4 self-rule, but really, as I like to say, the server is in the West still. We're just the screen, the desktop, yes, the monitor.
The monitor.
The wallflower, of the computer system.
Nick, let me come to you, because that's a very interesting perspective that Timothy is giving. What makes the difference between being independent and having self-rule?
Well, I think that, in common speak, people view independence as being completely uninfluenced and then being really, really self-governing in every sense of the word. But as we know it now, in a world such as the one we live in, such a thing doesn't really exist. There's a world of interdependentness, that what happens in D.C., Washington, D.C., in the District of Columbia affects somebody in my village in Powell, or what happens, in fact, as we know now, in Liberia affects people, in Washington, D.C. So it's a world of interdependentness. The point we need to ask ourselves is, where is our place in this whole infrastructure? And as Tim has accurately defined it, we are on the lower side of the spectrum, because a lot of the things appear to be handed down to us from the West. But what is also true is that we do not have white administrators here. The British left. But what they have done is left us here with their, what people would perhaps want to suggest, their masters ruling us, black agents of colonial rule, who would come and shout at Kololo, but the next morning are negotiating for deals in Western capitals. The good example I can give you is when President Museveni was here lambasting the West, about their views on the anti-homosexuality law. The Governor Bank of Uganda and the Minister of Finance was at the World Bank at across DuPont Square in Washington, negotiating for more money from the West. So there's all this sense that we're independent, and yet in actual sense, in the true sense of the word, we still rely on many things that are extraneous to our country.
Chris, at 52, is it yet Uhuru? Uhuru is the Swahili word for independence.
Independence. It's a technical question, but I want to answer it by asking also some questions that are puzzling, because we may not have all the answers to Uganda's problems. The question I want to ask is that, do we have Ugandan leaders, or do we have leaders in Uganda? The two are different. And then I want to ask myself another question. What is the motivation of the Ugandan elite? Because every society advances based on these philosopher kings. What's the role of our philosopher kings? Where have they taken us? In terms of government output, which means basic activities, indeed there are so many activities that government has done since independence. But what we are looking at here is the impact of those activities. Is it to a desired result? And that's what we are questioning. Definitely it is not. So the question then is, was this independence clearly understood by the ordinary Ugandan? Or it was a matter by the Ugandan elite then, whose motives I'm beginning to examine? What motivated them to spearhead the need for independence? Was it to take over from who were these governors here at that time?
The colonial governors.
Colonial governors. Did they want to remain the Queen's agents, and the Queen returns people who looked like her? Or did they want to be agents of the Ugandan people? Clearly it doesn't seem to be so. Because if it were so, that which motivated them to seek independence would now be reflected in the modes of production and the quality of leadership. Because countries develop depending on what means they use to produce. It's all about production. And then who are the people who spearheaded this? We would have seen a lot of progress. We are going to talk about Singapore. Yes, but Singapore developed partly because of the culture of the people there.
Is it the culture of the people, the culture of the leaders?
The leaders, the culture in their people that we must produce. We must go this way. And Singapore, others say it's a capital of fines. But the leaders there are comfortable with the fines because the fines are about them. So I think 52 years down the road, we are yet to get the quality of leaders desired to challenge the rest of the world. Opio is right to say, whatever happens today is what the Western capitals wants to happen here. That's why I'm asking, why do we allow that to happen that way? Because one, we don't have our own means of production. We don't have quality leaders. It is either World Bank, IMF, or Commonwealth, which is not common anyway, who decide what we do. So the question for those listening to us and those in the power, What is your motivation?
Let me throw it back to Timothy here. Is it out of Africans' control to move this idea of independence from just self-rule to actual independence? And I've been asking myself questions. We spend years celebrating or debating an effort to build a bridge over the River Nile. The second bridge after the one built by the colonialists. But we spend ceremonies, the president has to be there to cut a tape, you have artistic impressions that make page one news, and you go back and ask the people who were the colonial masters on most of Africa and most of the developing world. They have bridges they built 200 years ago, and I've been trying to examine where they richer than Uganda is today to find that they built a bridge that has survived for 250 years, or have buildings that have lived for that long. And today in Uganda, we are still saying, you see, we don't have enough resources. You see, we are still poor. You see, we are still this. What is it about us as a people that has held us stuck to the ground?
We've had many private discussions, you and I, over what seems to be a new view these days of the mind. You seem to sit as the brainwashed African mind. I can piece that with what Chris has just said, the philosopher kings. The Greek philosopher Aristotle mentions in his, I think, Nicomachean or Nicomachean, written that way, Ethics, when he explains how we arrive at this concept of good. And to really summarize a long, complex story, he says that when you're selecting leaders for a country, it's futile to try and get an adult and train him to understand the right from the wrong. It starts at the level of children. Children first do not have a conceptual understanding of the world, so they are taught gradually through habit. Do not touch that because it will burn you. Drop this, leave it there. Don't put that phone in the water, it will get spoiled. So they are taught the practical.
Sometimes where they use the turnover, they let the child touch, realize that it burns, and then they won't touch it again.
Yes, so they are taught practically in those at the younger stage how they are taught how to do the right out of habit, according to Aristotle. Then later, when they get older, 18, 20 and whatever, they then start to understand the conceptual world. Now they begin to understand not only that it is wrong for you to put your hand, let's say, in a fireplace, but why that is a problem. And he said that that when you're building a state that is solid, you avoid the futility of getting Charles, let's say, out of the blue, make him a menace of state, and think Charles will become a person of integrity. It must start from the beginning. That's why many times, partly on radio, partly in the newsroom and different arenas, Chris here has argued that the mistake we make in our Ugandas and these continents, or these countries of ours, is to look at people in the official capacity. We then look at what people say in public, the positions they take, the policy papers they give at conferences. Chris, people like me and many others will say, no, look at upbringing, look at the person behind the person. When we sometimes do that, then we're accused of so-called going personal. So many of the people who took over our countries, if you read those books, Dan Abderi had an interesting book about imperialism and war and imperialism in Uganda. And many of those African writers series, you remember, the Chinua Achebes, who were stuck in between this culture that overwhelmed us, did not react. That first class of people, you know, the Lion, the Jewel,
Baroka and
yes, this sense in which, yes, you come in and, like I wrote on the, okay, now that we're discussing the Kampala Express yesterday, this question of the relationship of boyfriend and girlfriend. You break up with a girl and all the attributes you saw in her, she's nice, wonderful, sensible. Now you must psych yourself into thinking there's something wrong with her. You must deny all those positives. And that's why the immediate period of when people break up in relationships is so painful, because you must now start undoing in your mind everything you once so nice in this person. When she gets like a new boyfriend, you must pretend he's worse than you. You're always in that crisis of having, you're stuck between resenting what you admire and admiring what you resent, that sort of thing. So in the same way, we have never resolved that question. The people who took over from the governors in Tebe, you saw the palace and you wanted to occupy it. So then later, the first class of children, if you look at the children who were born in the late 50s, 60s and onward, they moved from the places they came from and moved to the Kololos, the Westlands in Nairobi and so on. So we became the new class of people trying to live like the West. And we're still stuck mentally in that world. We have not yet arrived at what I think Chris sometimes in different words has tried to discuss. What is modernity that's not westernization? We haven't arrived at that yet. The Singapores, the Japans, the South Koreas have arrived at a sense of a modern, very clean, efficient state that's not necessarily Western. But us, we haven't yet reached that stage where what is modern, what's a new country?
The question is why?
Why? Because of that lack of what Chris described in the philosophy. There's in the Bible, in the book of Proverbs, chapter 25, one of the verses says it is, I think it summarizes what you call royalty based. We think of traditional royalty, in the kingdoms of Uganda as cows and all this hereditary leadership. But the Bible in Proverbs 25 says it is for God to hide a thing from man or something, and it is for kings to uncover the secret thing. So the true royalty is in that sense of the Shakespeares, the Isaac Newtons, the discovery of knowledge. In our societies, it is still what you own, what you have. It is still social status.
Charles is a student of history.
Sure.
You remember when we were doing history in secondary school? They used to tell us about, write it in full, Iberia, Imperial British East African Company. It was here simply to exploit. Now, I think as conscience grew, it became unfashionable, just like slave trade. Slaves were taken actually to help the European industries, their Western industries. Labor is very critical. So they have made a leap out of that. It also became unfashionable to still dominate people. You can have another means. Now, they broke down Iberia into Uganda Limited, Kenya Limited, Tanzania Limited, with now local agents, people running these companies for the profit of those who started it.
Iberia, interestingly, Iberia was a loss-making company. Actually, it walked out of East Africa after making losses before they handed over Uganda, Kenya to the
and why?
To the British government.
Because it was run by the British themselves. Maintaining a British person here as a CEO of Iberia is more expensive than maintaining a Ugandan leader here. There they can harass their own people and give you what you want. You begin earning from interests. You know that investment.
Just 52 years later, we can't keep blaming the Western world.
Exactly, and that's what I wanted to.
We're not blaming them. We're saying
I think
the
that we are ourselves engulfed in a myth of. I think we're just people who are mediocres. We don't want to liberate ourselves from the infrastructure left behind by the whites. So what we then do is seek refuge in blaming the whites for all our problems. 52 years later, we ought to find ourselves in this world and begin to define our values, begin to define what defines us as a people, really. But if you still have, heads of states still seeking to drive in Land Rovers as their cars, it becomes a big thing. You still have to go to Western capitals to define your own national policies, then that problem is going to continue. I think that Africans must begin to define themselves.
But
the reason Singapore and China...
The Africans are seated here.
We actually agree with Nicholas.
Wait a moment, gentlemen.
Yes.
The Africans you're asking are seated here on this table.
Yeah.
The Africans you're asking are watching you out there.
Yes.
So who is going to begin asking?
No. There's what they call, don't blame Nicholas who seated here. Yeah. There's something called the political elite. Make the difference. We are not a political elite.
And
political elite are those people who exercise government authority.
In fact, many of them despise us who talk here and call us talking heads.
So Nicholas, we're not disagreeing. We are only trying to tell people what it used to be with the white man and what the white man's interests are, to actually show that we do not have people who have our interests to match the Western interests. Yeah. So we're not simply saying the West is bad. We are saying that is what they wanted to do for their own good. Yeah. And unfortunately, what do we have today, Nicholas? Look at China. Look at Russia, look at Korea, look at India. Even India was a colony, I think.
For 200 years.
For 200 years. But the leadership there realized that we need to be Indians. And what are we seeing today all over the world? Indian food is the best. Even in the UK, Indian restaurants are the top thing.
Yeah.
Chinese restaurants are dominating the world, competing with McDonald's. What do we see in Kampala, Charles? What do we see in Kampala? We see Ugandan suit tie welding people saying, I'm going to have Chinese food. We are going to eat Indian cuisine. To mean all the cuisines in Toro that they have eaten for years are inferior. That's the stupidity I talk about begins from there.
Okay.
Can we pick up
this debate after a short commercial break? I have a lot of questions about India and China, because yes, there has been this surge of development, but the populations, even like Uganda, because you'll find if someone took a good panoramic shot of Kampala or these exclusive neighborhoods, you'd find this is, actually with Jennifer Musisi, you find a lot of the streets are very clean now. They are wider, and someone would think, wow, we have gotten there. But a majority of the population has been left behind. And this still happens in some of these areas. Let's pick this discussion up after a short commercial break. You're still watching the Fourth Estate, and we're discussing at 52 years. Let me go back to the analogy I used at the beginning of the show. My first question to you. If you were a 52-year-old man, because all of the entire set here are people below 50. I think all of us here are below 50. So at 52 years, even at our age, someone would ask, do you really know where you're going? Are you acting your age? Because those are questions that get asked. And the question I want to start with Nicholas again is, why do we find ourselves where we are? Why are we unable as a people to begin asking these questions so that this shapes the young people who are watching this show now, the old people who are watching this show, and the middle-aged people who are watching this show, and say, what actually is the problem?
Well, you know, I look at it in two ways. First, I think that there's a lack of leadership, to provide leadership to a country, the political leadership. Because in any country, the direction of a country is determined by the actions of government policies or, you know, government leaders. But more importantly for me, the software is our cultural, sense of being as a people. We are unable to define our own values, and I think the point that my good friend Chris makes about, suited Ugandan, middle class or alleged middle class, going to have, Chinese dishes and believing that that is more superior than the African dishes. We have.
I thought that's just a matter of choice, because I see people trooping to Baguma's restaurant because they think that's very good food. I found the class is talking about the political elite.
Well, but you see, the thing is then that you have those who will go to Baguma's restaurant, but you have the majority who will go and spend much more than that in a Chinese restaurant, or perhaps in an Indian restaurant, or even a Turkish restaurant.
They go to Baguma because Baguma is cheap. When they don't spend big money, they
in
go
the middle of the month. So I think in terms of defining a culture, defining who we are, the countries that have developed that we are pointing to, is, like China, like India, are countries that have defined their own culture and come to the international stage with their own values and set of values. We just haven't done that. You can't.
What would it take for this country? Because when you raise the argument you're raising, people will tell you, since over the last 28 years, we have made tremendous progress. You're just being a critic. You don't see how much progress we have made. And someone will proudly tell you that. And then the other thing most people fall back to, especially leadership, is they fall back to say, look, how are we doing compared to Tanzania? How are we doing compared to the DR Congo? How are we doing compared to Sudan? Those comparisons, which make me extremely uncomfortable. Now there is an Ebola outbreak in West Africa, Liberia. Liberia, a little bit of Senegal, Sierra Leone, and a little bit in Nigeria. And Guinea, yes. People are saying, you see, we are better. We're able to handle this better. There seems to be a fundamental problem that we have been unable to disentangle.
Well, if you watch the press conference by the head of the CDC in DC, he was crediting his government for the fight against Ebola in Uganda, and you even can't imagine it is our own success. Precisely the point, the most important message at Kololo was a message from Obama, not a message from some chief in my village, because we just don't find any value in them. We have failed to define who we are as a people, and we look to the West to define who we are.
Exactly. So Charles, when you talk about the progress, let's admit the things they are listing. We have dams, we have roads now. What else? We have many universities. There is something called a sustainability mechanism. What we think we have achieved. What is the sustainability mechanism? I'm not discussing that there are no roads now, there is no security now. That's a given. We're supposed to be thinking 100 years from now. We're supposed to be thinking 50 years from now. But if they make us think like eating today means you are alive forever, then we become foolish. China can sustain its economy. Coming out to Africa is another means of just sustaining our economy. That's why there is Chinese technology. You are talking about India having poverty. Poverty is a complex phenomenon everywhere. Even America has poverty. But there is Indian technology. Tata is an Indian car. There's now a tractor from India challenging Ferguson tractors.
Look at patents being registered.
Look at patents being registered in India. There are books coming out of India. Well, poverty is there, but there is what is Indian. And they're even exporting that which is Indian to the rest of the world. That's why their Indian cuisine is in Kampala, and everyone trooping there. Indian dress is becoming a hot thing in Uganda's marriage ceremonies. And you're still talking about you being Ugandan. How many how do you call it, this Buganda food? Boiled food?
Luombo.
How many Luombo restaurants are in China? And the Chinese are trooping to eat Ugandan food. How many people in the USA eat a cup, which me I grew up eating, in spite of it also being in the US? And how many Americans have they made believe that, oh, this is Ugandan? When you travel to India, when you travel to Norway, when you travel to London, when you travel, they will tell you this is German food in their own restaurants. You come to Uganda and tell you, I'm going to eat French beans. I grew up eating bloody beans here. What does a Frenchman who has never been to Africa come to Uganda and feel Ugandan about it? And he finds the same thing. The same thing in the hotel room is French. Perhaps it's European. He will wonder, am I in Uganda? So we don't have those small things. Food Ugandan is useless. The other day, police was opening a garments factory. I was so happy. They are going to make their own uniform. I asked them, fine, but where does the chalani come from? Where does the cotton come from? Where is it? You know, we are at the, how do you call it, the Juakali level. We should be having Ugandan technology, Ugandan food moving, Ugandan. It's not there.
How does that compete with what they call a global village? With all this competition, someone was asking me yesterday about if I needed an iPhone 6. Because someone is traveling from America, an iPhone 6 is on the market now, someone can buy it and come with it. Where is, because you have very brilliant young people, if you go to that Institute of Computer Science and Technology at Makerere University, you find very brilliant young people who are able to make things. Must you reinvent the wheel?
It's not about reinventing the wheel. It's about adapting technology and have your own. The Chinese sometimes copy American technology, but they make it themselves. Yes, they do it. You will have something made by China, the technology from the raw material to oil process, it is China. Now, this wise clever people in Makerere University remain at the classroom cleverness. They don't have a factory, they don't have the minerals, they don't know where they make iron, they don't. So what we do, we see German technology transported it to Uganda, stationed here. And then the Germans beginning to do their thing here. Then we say we have brought industries here. But if Germany said, because Uganda is no longer profitable, we do not want our technology there, Uganda gets to a standstill. That's what they call a sustainability mechanism. Where is it?
Timothy.
Where are the factories from Toro?
Timothy, let me come back to you. I went for a burial the other day in Toro, and I was passing by a coffee factory that the president opened in his very, very early years as a president, and now it's in Bush. It's failed function for some reason. Timothy, I also used the example of this obsession we have over building a bridge over River Nile, the second bridge we're trying to build. Makes page 1 news cover, photographic impression, artistic impression rather, of what this bridge is going to look like. We have spent years, we spent a lot of years discussing Bujagali. Blamed everybody from the Bujagali to spirits on that river for not building a 250 megawatt dam over that at the Bujagali Falls. Now, without Budagali, without spirits, without opposition, without environmentalists, we are stuck trying to build a 600 megawatt dam at Karuma. The cost of that 600 megawatt dam is higher. I was actually comparing with America sending someone, I think they're sending an experimental robot to Mars.
Yeah.
And the cost is very close in terms of when you look at what they're trying to achieve and what we're trying to achieve. And I compare. You travel in Europe, in America, you find bridges built 250 years ago. Grand bridges that still function today, and we're still saying, no, you see, for us, we're going to build a bridge. There must be something fundamental that holds either our thinking back or cannot allow us to see beyond, cannot allow us to aspire. Because that's why if you have a building like what is this other one? Workers' House, or the one NSF is trying to build up, you say smart building. That is why Mapera House of the Centenary Bank becomes an ultra-modern building. It might be but that it is defining the skyline of Kampala. Is there something else that beyond the British handing over I mean lowering the Union Jack and raising the Ugandan flag. Is there something beyond that?
But it's back to what I was saying earlier, the question of our very sad state. This is a journalist friend of ours, Andrew Mwenda, told me that once that in his discussions with Kenneth Kaunda, Milton Obote, Frederick Chiluba, and people like that, you know, during his travels, he says he noticed that each time he talked to these people, when you really get beyond the politics of the president and the opposition and get back to what the Rastafarians call roots and culture, he notices how much this thing called the British influence and the British teachers in school had on them. All of them go across, even speak to them 70s. This thing called we had a British headmaster and whatnot, it really stuck with them. And I think somebody needs to investigate the effect of this British on our leaders in the formative years. That's why I say that our elite class comes, it's overwhelmed by this foreign culture. A lot of those books, you know, God's Bits of Wood, and the entire series of West African and East African literature after the Second World War speaks to that question. So I think that's what I was saying on the Kampala Express in the article yesterday. We need to just come to, first of all, acknowledge the objective facts of the weight of this thing called the West. If we don't do that, then we remain stuck in this troubled state where, you know, you become like this Professor Mazrui is very Pan-Africanist, but they teach in American university. You know, this, you know, the Bob Marley with all that Jah Rastafari talk about his bank accounts for his music was in the US. So to not acknowledge that, that's why I began by saying we have this, you had a boyfriend, you broke up with his boyfriend. He's now, let's say he's now the
girlfriend, the only men here.
okay, let's just say, okay, you had a girlfriend, you broke up with a girlfriend, your ex-girlfriend becomes like Miss Uganda. How do you deal with that? You then must sort of, you can't start saying she's not Miss Uganda. All the things she was with you, she still is, but then now she's your ex. So now you must sort of go through that mental process of denying as a fine, she's Miss Uganda, but that doesn't matter. There's more to life than beauty.
It makes it easier, actually.
Exactly, yes. So we're still at that stage where we're denying facts around us. We are struggling mentally. That's why I can see the president, when it comes to the question of President al-Bashir of Sudan, because he was supporting the LRA, then the ICC is a wonderful institution. But then when he realizes, by the way, one day that same ICC might raise the question of what happened in Congo in the late 90s, then and Uhuru Kenyatta, his protege, then suddenly the ICC is that psychological state we're in constantly. You got the US, you meet some like a white on a train, he ignores you and you think it's racism, constantly fighting that mental game until we arrive to at a point where we accept, okay, this is a powerful culture. Even if you read the China Daily newspaper and of the Chinese government, unlike us, I was telling by SMS Charles once, the Chinese fully acknowledge, by the way, what the West is. They will tell you America beats us in patents and innovation, we need to catch up and all this. They're still communists, but you'll never hear them explained away in terms of, yeah, that's imperialism and all this, those isms we love. The Chinese are just factual about it. They sell the paper, go buy it at Garden City, you'll be surprised. They will just come out and say the Chinese law is okay, but we still have decades to catch up with America and all this. So when the Chinese arrive at that bit, the Chinese see what they say about the Apples and Googles. They don't bring in all this talk of ours of that's the American system, the World Bank and all this. They just see them America as competitors. Better than us in this innovation, but Huawei is catching up, and we might also catch up, let's say, with the is it Hisense? The fridge maker and all consumer electronics. The Chinese look at the West as just rivals, competitor, and they don't bring in all this talk of it's because of their business. They don't blame anybody, and they freely acknowledge their limits and work around this. We're still in that state where we deny, but on the other hand, we need them.
In other words,
yes.
Timothy talking about the impact of socialization.
Yes.
From colonial times, I've been socialized. To see everything good must come from the West. Because, I'm told they're giving our grandparents goggles and they would be happy. They're going to choose the most strong and say, take this one. Then they bring a mirror. Pick Mangusha. That one is sickly, leave him. Take Timothy. It has continued up to today in a different form altogether. Because even talk about economically, people will tell you it's a global village. Yes, but a global village, you must interact by each competing to put goods on that market. Each one puts values on that market. What we are doing, we are absorbing values and destroying what we have because we have already agreed that the other one which is coming is superior. For instance, Charles, look at the malls, for instance. We are operating a market economy, yes, but for whose interest? For Ugandans. I allow you to open a mall here. I expect you to sell to Ugandans. And what do Ugandans want to buy? Those that they don't have here, you can bring them. But you'll find apples in the malls
From South Africa.
from South Africa,
Not from
and
Kabale.
Kabale is growing apples. At the same time, your leaders are saying we are a food basket. We want to maximize advantage in agriculture. You find pineapples are so many in Kayunga, but the pineapples are coming from Kenya to the malls. Yes, Charles, you will find toothpicks from China. In a time when we have said we are modern, toothpicks, we have Mabera forest, we cut trees,
Bamboo trees.
everything. Toothpicks from China. This is what they call industrialization. A matchbox we cannot make. We have to bring somebody's technology here. So this is what I'm saying.
Charles,
And yet, Nicholas, we are still obsessed with the socialization he talks about. We call our people His Excellency,
You see,
Honorable,
the hypocrisy of
Your
our
Lordship.
society.
Even when a judge is corrupt, he must say Your Lordship.
Let
Come
me
on.
actually link this to what Timothy has started on, Nicholas. Because you're a lawyer, so you're a legal expert of all of us who are here. This selective selective criticism, when it comes to other things, you're okay with the West. When it comes to things that where we try to assert our independence, the president rises the
Well, I mean,
International Criminal Court. And then you go back a few years ago. It's hardly 15 years ago, 2003, 2002, when he ran to the ICC, and that appearance with Moreno Campo to say, we have a situation in Kampala, please come and help us. In Laitkony, Okoto Diambo, and the others. Today, the ICC is very bad. Where does this come from?
I mean, it's the hypocrisy of our leaders, really. And you see, you've got to look beyond just Uganda being the first country to refer a case to the ICC, because the Ugandan case was the first case ever before the ICC. But look at it this way. Uganda has a judge at the ICC. Justice Sinsereko, sits at the ICC. Uganda is the only country in Africa hosting the court, who were very quick to pass the ICC Act when we were hosting the Assembly of State Parties here, the first ever Assembly of State Parties of the Rome Statute. So the hypocrisy of our leaders, that they seek to use the ICC for a particular reason, when that then comes back and appears, as Tim says, able to catch up with them for their crimes, you then begin to say the ICC is bad. But even to go further than that, you then have a situation where you're lambasting the court, but going to the court to train your judges. You're going to the court to train your prosecutors. You're asking for the court to give you resources to train your own judicial officers, behind the background. But also not doing anything concrete in terms of, carrying forward what you call your threat. Because the African leaders have been saying, the ICC is bad. But they have done nothing, concretely speaking, to even address that conflict at the Assembly of State Parties. When they met here in Kampala, the biggest discussion was about the crime of aggression. What is that crime? How do you define it? Which countries would be liable? And I can tell you the US, which was not even a part of the Rome Statute, was very influential in that discussion.
It had the biggest delegation, I think.
The African leaders who were crying about the ICC said nothing absolutely about what their disagreements are with the ICC. They can't seem to define that disagreement, but seem to be very happy to take onto the podium and make sounding statements, but do nothing about actually defining what their disagreements
How does this tie into that mind of an independent African? How you think you are independent when you practice a philosophy of blame it on the West? Everything blame it on the West. Because in many discussions from our leaders, you'll find a string of a correct diagnosis of what the problem is.
This is how
Where we never move, Chris, where we never move is assigning actual solutions, trying to define what actually works. I've had a long discussion with Timothy, and he said, we have missed opportunity. The AIDS pandemic broke out and hit hardest in sub-Saharan Africa. It remains as the biggest problem in sub-Saharan Africa. Since slave trade. More than almost 30 years later, we are still unable to have our doctors sit in a lab and find a solution, an African solution, and yet you meet a lot of people. You have found a lot of people in the countryside, in Amuria, in Toro, in Amuru, in Gulu, who tell you if you mix this and supply it and add it with this, a person suffering from diarrhea will be okay. Someone who is anemic will be healed by this. And to be able to enhance those you still have to rely on UVRI, Uganda Virus
I don't know
Control
whether
Institute,
Nicholas will agree with
largely
this.
run by CDC.
How I look at the ICC statements. But that the core of independence, what you are saying, we'll get to that. This ICC became prominent because of this comedy staged by Uhuru Kenyatta. I don't like to use the word Excellency because it's useless. The words are just a colonial. The other ones are moved on. You are still his worship, his what? It is just Uhuru Kenyatta, maybe Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta or President Kenyatta. But that comedy of putting power to one person in one day, and you go, then you come back, and they say this guy is a Democrat. Really, sometimes we are intellectually very dishonest. To use his word, we are mediocre. If Kenyatta thinks that African problems, the African solutions, the reason for which is before ICC court is the killings in Kenya. Up to now, I see Kenyan refugees who were recruited to Western Uganda from Tororo. They haven't gone home.
From Western Kenya? Western Uganda or Western Kenya?
No, they have traveled somewhere this way from Tororo. The Kenyan refugees were shipped to Chiriandongo somewhere. Some are still in Tororo. Some went back. I see families that lost their loved ones in Kenya. Kenyatta, since he became a president, has never instituted court proceedings, a healing process. That is a Kenyan solution to what happened. But he's able to go to ICC and come, the problems of Kenya are followed by Kenya. Where is evidence that since that happened and he became president, he is actually trying to heal? He has resettled the people who ran away, he has punished the criminals, he has punished the suspects, and those who are free have been let free. Nothing.
I thought,
he's the president.
I thought he's the principal suspect.
Well, and I can tell you,
in this case, and he's the president.
Can I just give more,
He
can I just
doesn't.
give more information?
And let me add something as you give more information. The contradiction for me is not in Nairobi. The contradiction is in Kampala. Because the biggest, no, the biggest critic or the champion of this onslaught against the ICC has been President Museveni. When he went for Kenyatta's inauguration at the African Union Summit in Addis Ababa, at his comments in Kampala, and at Independence, he has become the champion. He is like the vanguard of African resistance against what they call this extension of imperialism and colonialism through the International Criminal Court.
Well, you'll never hear Uhuru saying that publicly. Perhaps some of the things are left to the old men of the in the group. Uhuru is perhaps a little smarter in that respect. But you see, the thing is this: the reason the ICC in the first place intervened in Kenya or in Uganda was because the judicial systems here or in Kenya themselves were unable or unwilling to bring to account people who had committed crimes. For the case of Uganda, we did so voluntarily. We said, look, we are unable to do this, please come and help us. We surrendered our sovereignty. We ceded power to the West, and said, please come help us. We cannot be the same people saying, these are agents of Western imperialism. The point is that we voluntarily admitted our own weaknesses and went there. To begin to then go around and say these guys are bad and at the same time host them just here in Kololo. The only outfield office of the court in the continent is here in Kololo. It's not in Kenya. And you host them, you ask them to train your judges, you ask them to give you evidence in the core yellow trial, and then you turn around and say these guys are bad. It's really just pure hypocrisy.
It's like signing, we need to take a break, but it's like signing off a protection agreement in towards the turn of the 19th century to these colonial agents who are coming around here and saying, we can protect your kingdom. And then they merge it to the other kingdom. And then you go back. Let's take a break and come back to this discussion. We'll be discussing a little bit about the Uganda Cranes Togo game that ended in a defeat for the Uganda Cranes at 1-0. After You're still watching The Fourth Estate and navigating through 52 years of independent Uganda, or is it actually independent? That's a question I've been trying to struggle with. And these questions of international sanctions for wrongdoing, the International Criminal Court, ties exactly into that. And people have been debating. I've been seeing comments about the performance of the Uganda Cranes yesterday against Togo, where it ended in a 1-0 loss at home, which is a fundamental break of a tradition we have held that at least we win our home games, though we never advance that much.
Was the guest of honor.
There was a lot of competition.
The Prime
about
Minister was the guest of honor.
there was a lot of competition because
There's only one Prime Minister.
there were tickets for free given by different political camps for people to go and watch the game. And someone was asking, why do you go to watch a game if you haven't built the infrastructure that actually delivers champions for you? And then once you have lost, people begin asking the question and say, no, at least we tried. And I've had fundamental concerns about that. At least we tried. If you have at least tried, you have gotten a draw. But if you have lost, in football, it's not about how well you played. It's about how many goals you scored. Now, Timothy, you're saying, if because we have been fed on this talk, we have moved from collecting 5 billion in 1986. Now we're collecting 1,000 billion. 1,500 billion, I think we're collecting now, 15 trillion, is what we're collecting today as domestic taxes. We have moved, when we get oil revenues, we shall get there. What is it? Is it transplanting from there to here, give Timothy money now and he'll be there, the football team will somehow manage to function, the runners will somehow try to outrun the Kenyans and the Ethiopians? What is it?
It is that mystery we have been discussing so many different words of when we finally come down to it, everything settles down. What do you see yourself as being? That's what I was saying during the break. If, and I've said it for many years, if we all sorted out the political problems, the corruption, the accountability, oil revenue used well, you know, most of the land that lies idle, I think only 18% of Uganda's land is fully used. Yes. If best case scenario, we become overnight, Singapore discuss, what would we do with that money? If per capita GDP became $10,000, then you'd see that problem that we face. Every home, I imagine, in Uganda will have this satellite dish and watching European matches. You see what I mean? Half of Uganda, it will become like what you see in Nigeria. Half of the society empties children. All our wives go have babies in US, UK hospitals and whatnot. So in other words, that we were stuck with this permanent balance of payments deficit because of just our very being, our very identity. Like one day, I remember,
but we can't change ourselves.
We can, or
how?
How is a bit of a complicated question. Aristotle, as I said, described it, but the media.
You see, he's quoting Aristotle, not Nicholas Appiah.
No. There's reason why, and as I said once again, there are facts about the West that make the West great. The West is not an accidental dominant force in this world. This idea that the West is great just because they plundered, yes, there were how many of the Western countries or the European countries were colonial masters? The Dutch, the French, the British, the Spanish, and the Germans briefly, the Portuguese, about 5 or 6 countries. And right now, which are the most advanced countries in the West? It's not even the colonial powers. It's not Spain, Portugal. It is the Luxembourg, Sweden, that had nothing to do with the Finlands, that had nothing to do with colonialism. There is net value. That's why I said, think of the Chinese. The Chinese are bigger than many of these countries. But we need first arrive at a point where we say, there are things about the West, with or without colonialism and all this and the slave trade. The West, the Industrial Revolution began in Britain. It wasn't using slave labor. It was innovation. We remember those things in primary school. The Joseph Priestley's who invented this, the steam engine and all that. There's an objective thing about the West that is on merit. There are things about the West, the Chinese, they can learn, and also they can learn from us. Once we solve the problem. What about all these
theories I've had that, we're not going back before even, we'll have each of us comment about the Uganda-Togo game. But when we go back into history, African history, there is some element of proud African history that says, actually, the crown of civilization is on the African continent. When people talk about university education in West Africa, when people talk about innovation, I mean, like Ugandans should be proud of the achievements of people like the late Kabalega, because his theory and approach to war is being studied at Sandhurst. Because they're telling you he knew how to plan, he had his formations. When you go to these, there is that, you talked about the Rastafari movement, which says, traces back and says, there was once a time when Africa was great and showed like it was in a direction. Then there was a time when Africa was colonized and all that went to West. And then there is a time today when everything Western is what makes sense. You can't take your children to your own schools because you have let them die, you fly them. You spend, if you look at the amount of money Ugandans spend, I think the last time we did a check, Chris, was about $350 million spent on treating Ugandans abroad. So the Prime Minister falls sick, fly them to South Africa, fly them to India, fly them to Germany and other places. You want to give birth, you fly, you can't have birth in Kampala.
But you see, Charles,
there is something, at what stage did things go so fundamentally wrong?
what Timothy is saying is that those countries pay attention to detail. That's increasingly, as ever said, that those little things, you come to a studio, the bulb has blown, nobody cares to fix it. It doesn't happen in other countries. If you don't have that element of detail, you can't even innovate. Because to fix something, it must tease your mind, it must challenge your mind. We have gotten it the easy way, Charles. And at the same time, in Iteso we say a poor man has good manners.
And that
Not because he's forced, not because he's good mannered. It is forced by a situation to be good mannered. Yes, you are hungry. The man who has food he says, okay, yes, Papa, because you want to eat. So a poor man has good manners. African countries, Uganda, because we have good manners to the West. And this is how. I don't want to think the West entirely means good to us. At the same time, I don't want to blame them for doing what they are doing. They have known their interests and how to meet them. But if you want the West has to observe how World Bank works, how IMF works, if there is a job here in Uganda that they want to do something on Uganda, on the projects, and most World Bank projects always have scandals before they do anything. Those scandals are purposed to delay that project so that more money is dispensed. Because they are judged by how much money you have given out. There is somebody in the embassy watching you.
because you're a lender.
You're a lender. Why are you not giving out the money? So sometimes they even have to create these procurement issues, procurement what, cost the people, project delays by this, they say we shall add you more money.
Okay.
Now, what I mean here, if there is a job earmarked by World Bank for particular people, and if they say it is for a white man, it must come as a technical advisor. They will say these are the perks come with it. They will. The day you decide to say no, we have our own good lawyer here, Nicholas, who will do it, they downgrade the perks in that field. Deliberately to fail you because they don't want Nicholas Opio to have that money.
We talked about paying attention to detail.
Yes.
We promised our viewers that we'll be discussing Uganda Togo.
Exactly.
So can we tie this independence into the Uganda Togo game? Because I've been uncomfortable with friends
Just a
who
question.
are celebrating.
If it's 52 years, why discuss our loss to Togo? Why not discuss 1978 Africa Cup of Nations?
Because it happened in 1978.
No, but I'm saying
No, it happened in 1978. We're in 2014, and we are still stuck to the old glory of the Cavalier guys. Why don't we debate why we can't get to the African Cup of Nations today?
Yes, I want to tell you, the Uganda Cranes, but
Brazil lost
there is also this thing. The worst
Isn't that the problem? Because Chris is, Timothy is saying even Brazil lost.
No, I'm not trying to say.
I was going to talk
I'm
about
trying to say that
Brazil.
if you talk about loss, I'm trying to say that even the World Cup, even the fancy teams do lose, the Italians lose.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to say that is that one loss now? And I'm not talking about the least common denominator. You know, the usual mourning of at least we tried. No, the fact of the matter is in football it can go either way. We have, except for this, I think since 2004, this might be the first loss at Nambole.
You see,
So let's not lose proportion.
let's have
But
a
see,
comment
Nicholas,
from each of us on the
people
Uganda
who know
Cranes
this,
game.
there is something called xenophobia. The West is very quick to remind Africa about xenophobia. And the African elite are very quick to remind everybody about xenophobia. But you watch the World Cup, you go to Brazil, the blacks can be in the team, but they're nowhere in the higher social life. You go to Colombia, which was largely a black country.
Are we going back to the debate of black versus white?
No, I'm just telling you why sometimes you must take note of these things. Why do they happen elsewhere? You go to Colombia, those who have gone will tell you, you see black men but nowhere in the hierarchy. But they can be in football. They have identified already where you belong and have accepted that. Xenophobia sits where they don't like it.
Okay.
But where you talk about it, they don't.
Okay, your comment about the Cranes Togo game.
What else do you want to say really? It is a football. We have been winning. We have been celebrating. And we have not lost to a white country. We have lost to Togo. So what is the problem?
No, since 1978,
Yes.
we have never crossed the group stages in the Africa Cup of Nations. And we keep dreaming about getting to the World
Even
Cup.
Ambole Stadium, Nicholas, if you go to Emirates, those who have gone, if you go to Manchester, those stadiums are more than stadiums. They are hotels, they base facilities, they are institutions. If you go to Nambole, when there's no activity, it is for snakes. Once in a while, pastors take it to pray, to use it.
Or policemen.
Policemen go there and conduct the activities. It is run down, completely run down.
Well,
And
here's my
Nicholas,
comment.
because
Here's my
it ties into the independence discussion.
Well, I want-
Ambition,
Yeah.
expectation, and how much we work towards achieving that.
Let me just move away from the independence discussion and just, I think, in my view, discuss what I think is the problem with the Uganda cranes. And believe me, I think it's going to get worse. Prepare yourself for the worst. Primarily because international games became the single most uniting factor in this country. No matter who you are, which color you wear in the day. Once the cranes were playing, everybody got there and supported the cranes. With manipulations now happening in the politics of this country, the cranes are going to suffer the effect of that. And you can begin to see it. The person who visits the cranes at their rundown hotel called the Sky Hotel somewhere in Belgrade is the chief of land forces, the one who went and removed soldiers from the Prime Minister's office. And you see what the police has done. FUFA, in what I think was a very ill-advised press conference, have a press conference with the chief of police talking about colors, what you shouldn't wear, what you should wear. The focus on the game, preparation, funding the team, making sure the team is a team. In many countries, people care about the national team. We just don't seem to care about the national team. And I think that it's going to get worse for the Cranes.
Tim,
But again,
the Uganda, hold it. Let's get Tim in, and then if we have time, I'll come back to you. Tim, the Uganda Cranes Togo, and this dream of qualifying for the World Cup and Africa Cup of Nations.
As I said, that sometimes we overanalyze very simple things. There was a football match. If you listen to yesterday Reuters and how they reported it, Uganda was 0, Togo 1, Gambia 4. Just that could be a story. Because, as we've said many times before, please remember, now we're talking about Uganda 52 years, not just the immediate FUFA and the politics of here. There are only 13 African countries over 54 that have ever won an Olympic gold medal, and Uganda is one of those. As shocking as it is, even these countries that are always being praised for being highly organized. On an Olympic medal or gold medal. And most of Africa's countries have never won a medal of any kind, not even a bronze. Uganda has 2 golds, multiple silvers, bronze, and whatnot. So in that sense, there are countries like the Tanzania's highest medal is a silver in the 5,000 meters in Moscow in 1980. Rwanda, which has always been praised by parts of Ugandan media for being organized, can only dream of even getting somebody in the final of any of these events. So in the perspective of 52 years, Uganda is still one of the cream countries, not quite like Kenya, Ethiopia in terms of medals and all this, but so this could have been one of those. We reached the Cup of Nations finals. How many countries have reached that level? Not quite. So what happened in the match yesterday? To me, it's just Togo beat us. And so next time we might beat some other team and just that.
What happened in our last attempt to get there, 2012?
Okay, as I said, that if you try and over politicize some of these ordinary events that are purely,
Is it an ordinary event? Because
but supposing we're beating Togo,
someone was saying
just a goal.
you don't your team. He called the team's training venue a rundown hotel. During training sessions, you don't even have water for the players to drink. If they win something, if Moses Kiprotich wins something, then all of you troop celebrate. Before, there isn't attention to detail. The manufacturer of the light bulb, the inventor, not the manufacturer, the inventor of the light bulb knew if you put this together with this, you get a light bulb. The success of the English Premiership, which is the most widely watched or followed football league in the world, is you wake up in the morning, you go start kicking the ball. And then at the end of that, until you're perfect, you kick and you become a David Beckham. You do not have...
Or a David Oboa.
No. The creation of a David Beckham and the accidental arrival of a David Oboa is what I'm trying to...
Yes, but as I said, but okay, that's why I said that sometimes we need to separate very specific things peculiar to sports from the wider politics. It was the same disorganized Uganda, the same corrupt FUFA. In the last 10 years, we haven't lost at Nambole. That same Nambole, this same Uganda, this same country, except yesterday. And England that you're describing, first and last one, a World Cup 1966. So English, The English Premier League as a league that brings in all sorts of players, yes, one of the glamorous league of football, world football. But England, the team with all the Beckhams and all the Wayne Rooney's, just hasn't won.
Okay.
See,
let's have Chris, Chris make the last comment, and then we'll get out of
when
here.
you talk about the English Premiership, it takes many things. It is interdisciplinary to have a good sports team. In England, a young man can forego the formal education to go to a sports academy, succeed as a footballer. But even if along the way you don't succeed, the system is so flexible that you can still resume your academic life. And there are many of them. Here today, no parent in their normal senses can sacrifice a child to go to a sports academy when even the school system itself is as bogus as anything else. So it is not possible. Let's look at a wider development issues before we even talk about this.
Okay.
There is no way you are going to say people don't love the Uganda cranes when actually when they go to Cancer Institute they are dying. So that cannot happen. What you see now,
just make your point and then we get out of here.
When you talk about the issues of funds, the issues of t-shirts being banned, I get the argument that people should be free to wear anything. But again, we have so much eager politically that we are so annoyed with the sitting government that people want anything that can remove it. And therefore, we're even conceding some of the things which are not correct.
The cranes won because of the
FIFA bans so many things. Even wearing clothes which are scripted on certain things. In those games, they punish a player. That means that if you allow UPC, FDC, DP, NRM,
the different shades of NRM,
to go to the stadium, football being an emotive thing, you can expect the worst.
Okay.
So I think they need to regulate political activity from a sports activity.
Okay.
Because sports brings all of us together, irrespective of which political party.
Okay. I need to say this as we get out of here, that the Cranes still have a chance. A 1-0 loss is not such a big loss that can be easily overturned.
In any case, if they lost, we are used to losing.
When they travel to Togo. So we go back into the mathematics. Thank you very much.
Can't even make a ball. Can you imagine?
Thank you very much, gentlemen,
down the road. No
for making
can
time for the show. Thank you very much to you all our viewers for joining us tonight. Do join us again next Sunday. Have a good night.